Did you know that the Pokemon Purugly is faster than Latios? This doesn't seem right at all, logically or just visually, but it's the truth. Purugly is weirdly fast, outrunning even Rayquaza and Salamence. I couldn't tell you why. There's nothing in Purugly's lore that suggests that it should be this fast in-game, but this is the reality we live in. Pokemon is full of many logical inconsistencies, and some of the most humorous can be found in the surprising stat values of different Pokemon. Why don't we take a look at 10 examples of Pokemon stats that seem to defy logic, and the competitive implications these unusually high or low stats might have, if any. Kicking things off with the Purugly situation, this is a Pokemon that honestly I do not think about that much. And it isn't a very good Pokemon, but it is strange how fast it is. Purugly has a above average speed stat of 112. This large and heavy looking cat seems like it should be a tank when you look at it, but its defensive stats are actually pretty terrible. It only has 71 HP and even worse defenses, 64 and 59 in each. The competitive identity of Purugly is that of a fast, physical attacker. Purugly is unsurprisingly a low-tier Pokemon, usually only used in very weak tiers power level-wise, like ZU and PU. But down there, Purugly does have a distinct identity among other normal types. In fact, whenever Purugly is in a low tier, it is often the fastest physical threat available, or at least on the upper end of the low tier physical threats, speed-wise. Purugly has the ability Defiant, which is actually a really nice offensive ability. If Purugly ever receives a stat debuff, it will, in turn, have a +2 boost to its attack. This is a fantastic way to punish enemy Pokemon using the move Defog. Defog is a common way to get rid of entry hazards from the field, but on top of removing entry hazards, it also lowers the enemy's evasion by 1, which unfortunately for them activates Defiant and grants a very worrying +2 boost to Purugly, who outruns most of the tier and hits pretty hard with such a boost. Purugly only has 82 attack, but this is pretty good for lower tiers, and with the nice priority option of Fake Out, Return for normal stab, U-turn for pivoting, which is very good actually, and even Sucker Punch for a form of priority. This is a formidable Pokemon in many low tiers across this great franchise's history. Purugly has unfortunately not appeared in the last 2 mainline Pokemon games. It is not present in Gen 8 or 9. Perhaps this is a response to the logical inconsistency of its high speed relative to its appearance, resulting in it being culled from the franchise entirely. I hope this is not true, and I would like for this uncharacteristically fast, fat cat to return to Gen 10, as I am growing fond of it the more I talk about it. Speaking of Pokemon with a weirdly high speed stat that doesn't seem to match up with their visual appearance or any sort of logic, we have MIltank. This is a cow-themed Pokemon, and I don't know if I'm stupid, but I don't think that cows in real life are known for their agility in particular, but MIltank has an impressive 100 base speed. That is quite a high speed stat, and MIltank is joining Purugly as yet another Pokemon that is faster than Rayquaza, in a completely absurd turn of events. MIltank debuted in Generation 2, where it was actually a pretty good choice in competitive. It is OU ranked in this generation, meaning it is considered a viable part of the metagame. Unlike Purugly, MIltank has some slightly better defensive stats. 95 HP and 105 defense are nothing to sneeze at. And MIltank has a pretty excellent utility move pool with Milk Drink for a form of healing, Heal Bell to cure status from allies, and Thunder Wave to spread a form of paralysis. And MIltank sets itself apart from other utility normal types in the tier, largely due to its weirdly high speed stat. 100 base speed matches that of metagame titan Zapdos. You outrun enemies like Nidoking and Exeggutor and Vaporeon, to name a few. And you also have 80 base attack, which isn't that high, but considering your good defensive properties and everything else going for you, MIltank is more threatening than something like Blissey, for example. So MIltank is a pretty functional Pokemon in Gen 2 OU, and this carried over to Gen 3 OU as well. MIltank is a little bit worse here, relatively speaking, as the metagame around it is more hostile, but this guy also gained a new ability here, the ability Thick Fat, granting a resistance to fire and ice-type moves, and its access to Heal Bell as well as well above average speed for a utility normal type give it niche value that nothing else can quite fill. And you do see MIltank from time to time on real competitive teams, which is pretty cool. Sometimes a weird stat that doesn't make logical sense gives a Pokemon some reason to exist competitively. MIltank is a prime example of this. But perhaps the most noteworthy example of all in this category would be Electrode. Electrode is famous for its strangely high speed stat. In fact, in the first generation, Electrode is the fastest Pokemon in the entire game, with an unbelievable base 140 speed. Now, I've always just kind of accepted this as fact. I look at Electrode and I believe that it's fast because I'm familiar with it. But if you think about it, it doesn't really add up logically, does it? This is an electricity ball. Why is this faster than Dragapult and Latios and Kyogre and Lugia and Mewtwo? Why is Electrode so fast? Is there a reasoning? I don't know. I consulted the Pokédex. They talked a lot about how it likes to explode in certain situations, but nothing about why it's so fast that I could find anywhere. But that's okay, because without this logical inconsistency, Electrode would certainly be a much more boring Pokemon and a Pokemon with no identity whatsoever. But this massive speed stat gives it some identity. Now, Electrode does have a lot going against it. Its stats, besides its speed, are all pretty bad. It has an 80 special attack, which is fairly usable, but nothing special at all. And it's also competing with Jolteon, who is extremely similar. Jolteon's almost as fast, with just 10 points lower, but Jolteon is much more offensively threatening and has the more useful ability, Volt Absorb. But there is some value to Electrode's massive speed stat sometimes. In Generation 3 OU, Electrode crucially outspeeds not only Jolteon, but Aerodactyl, who are considered the fastest, common, and relevant Pokemon in that metagame. But it's not really sure what to do from there, because it doesn't one-hit KO Aerodactyl with Thunderbolt, which is a shame. And you don't really hit Jolteon with much either. The best thing you can do against Jolteon is paralyze it with Thunder Wave or explode against it to trade with it. And oftentimes just paralyzing Aerodactyl is also the best thing you can do there. It's actually a pretty useful thing to do, as paralysis will nerf a Pokemon's speed stat by 75%, thus rendering them basically useless. Aerodactyl and Jolteon are defined by their high speed, so if you cut that from them, you've basically killed them. Electrode is mostly just a funny joke here, but there has been at least one example of a player using Electrode. Super Epic Ampharos is a player that brought Electrode to SPL, which is actually a very prestigious high-level tournament. And they won the game, which is kind of insane. Electrode used options such as Light Screen and Explosion at its high speed to set up for a very interesting win condition. Moving on to more illogical Pokemon stats, did you know that Ledian has a extremely high special defense stat? Ledian's special defense is 110, which is extremely high. It's matching the special defense stat of Snorlax, and visually that does not add up, let me tell you. It has a higher special defense than Necrozma Duskmane, Lunala, and even Dialga, if you can believe it. I've heard whispers about the reasoning for this, and what I've heard is that Ledian was supposed to have 110 attack, not special defense, but somebody made a mistake in the programming, and it has just persisted to this day. This would make a lot of sense, because Ledian has a lot of punching-themed qualities to it. I think in the Pokédex it talks about how it can punch people, and yet its attack stat is lower than dirt. And I don't see any logical reason why Ledian, a little ladybug, can withstand the power of magic more than Dialga or Lunala. That just simply doesn't make any sense, does it? Unless there's something I haven't been told about. Unfortunately, Ledian has extremely limited competitive value, and the merits of this uncharacteristically high special defense are almost nowhere to be seen. It has a move pool that was clearly designed around being a physical attacker, and with its laughably low physical attack, Ledian sort of just doesn't do anything. The only way that Ledian can take advantage of its good special bulk is with utility sets that set effects like Reflect and Light Screen on the field to assist allies. And you sometimes see that in the Gen 3 ZU format, but even there, it is very scarcely seen. Ledian can also use its bulk to set up boosts and baton pass to transfer those boosts to a teammate. Ledian has access to agility, which raises your speed, and then you can pass that on to something like Marowak in Gen 3 OU and possibly sweep with that, but you know, Pokemon like Ninjask and Zapdos do the exact same thing, but way better. So unfortunately in this instance, the illogically high special defense of Ledian is not a benefit. In fact, it kind of ruined the Pokemon's whole identity and damned it to a career of mediocrity. And I hope in Gen 10 they reverse this error finally and flip the stats, give this guy its 110 attack that it always wanted. One of the most well-known surprising Pokemon stats is that of Onix, and its weirdly low attack stat. Onix only has 45 base attack, which just doesn't look right. This is a big serpentine rock creature. It looks like it would deal some pretty hefty physical damage to people. And yet, here are some Pokemon with higher attack stats. Sentret is apparently more of a physically imposing threat than Onix. Joltik, Pinecone. You're telling me a Pinecone is more threatening. And of course Shroodle is considered a earth-shattering threat compared to Onix. This is well known. So how does this play out in practice? How does Onix and its weirdly low attack stat affect its competitive identity? Well, Onix is primarily used in the Little Cup tier. Little Cup is a format where you're only allowed to use the first stage in a Pokemon's evolution line. So it's full of baby Pokemon. And Onix, weirdly, fits the criteria. It's the first stage in a Pokemon's evolution line. It's considered a baby. And Onix's primary role here is that of a hazard setter. With its ability Sturdy, it is able to live a hit from full HP, giving it a safety net against any incoming damage, and a reliable way to hit Stealth Rock. Even though Onix only has 45 attack, in the Little Cup tier, it actually manages to hit hard enough, or harder than you would expect, as Rock and Ground are great stab types, so you get bonus damage on both of those types, which are really good. Rock Blast is very useful because Rock Blast is a multi-hit move that is able to break enemies with Focus Sash or Sturdy. And Onix also has Explosion, allowing it to sacrifice itself, going out with a bang and dealing significant damage as it does. Onix also has a more directly aggressive set it can use with the other ability Weak Armor. If a Pokemon with Weak Armor is struck by a physical attack, they will receive +2 speed and -1 defense. Onix happens to have a absurdly high defense stat of 160. This is kind of a crazy stat in its own right. Makes a bit more sense. Onix does look like a physically defensive creature, but it is very high, outdoing the defense stats of even legendaries like Dialga and Ho-Oh and other such fellas. And since Onix is a baby, it is able to hold the Eviolite item, granting a boost to defense and special defense if the holder is not fully evolved, which Onix isn't. So it is able to take physical hits extremely well, even if they are super effective, and upon taking a physical hit, it will receive this Weak Armor boost and outrun everything. So even though Onix has such a low attack stat, it ends up functioning in its primary tier as a bit of an offensive threat because of everything else working for it. The fact that its physical defense is so high that it can pretty easily receive that Weak Armor boost, allowing it to pose more of a threat with the initiative of speed that it receives. And thanks to its great stab types, it's often dealing super effective damage to common enemies, especially enemies like Vullaby and Abra. And with Explosion, you are able to get that last bit of value out of Onix when its health is low, and it's a champion at surviving hits and getting one last Explosion in there. And Explosion tends to trade with things pretty consistently, if not bringing them low enough to die to a slight breeze. So Onix has a weirdly low attack, but what about a weirdly high attack? Have you heard of the Pokemon Trapinch? I take a Trapinch, you take a Trapmile. It's a common phrase. You've heard it before, I'm sure. Trapinch is the baby version of Flygon, and Trapinch has a base attack stat of 100, which is very high for a baby Pokemon. So unfortunately for Onix, Trapinch has you beat by more than double of what your measly attack stat is, but it's worse than that. Trapinch is outdoing Eternatus in physical damage output. Eternatus has a measly 85 base attack and cannot possibly hope to be as powerful as Trapinch. Lugia has a measly 90 base attack, pathetic if you ask me. And Trapinch has an even higher attack stat than Furret. This is the most surprising of all. When I learned of this, I almost fainted in shock. Now, every other stat Trapinch has is atrocious, as you would expect from a baby Pokemon. It only has 10 speed and 45 in all of its other stats. But that 100 attack is noteworthy, and it gives it some merit down in the world of Little Cup. Yes, we're returning to Little Cup again. Trapinch also has the ability Arena Trap, which is one of the most powerful abilities in the entire game. This traps enemies and prevents them from switching out. This is a banned ability in most formats, but it is legal to use in Little Cup, uniquely. Trapinch has some competition here, as Diglett is an alternative arena trapper, who is notably way faster. But Trapinch sets itself apart from Diglett in certain situations. Even though Trapinch has terrible defense, Diglett's is even worse. Diglett has 25 defense. Trapinch has 20 more points of defense, and with an Eviolite boost, Trapinch can actually live way more physical hits than Diglett can. Plus, Trapinch has almost double Diglett's attack stat, base 100 being well above average for the world of Little Cup. So it has that going for it, and in Generation 9 Little Cup, Trapinch is actually pretty excellent. This guy has a new option that makes up for its very low speed. First Impression is a 90 power bug type priority move that only works on the first turn you've been sent out, kind of like the move Fake Out. They have a similar effect, but this is excellent on such a slow Pokemon, and it allows Trapinch to be able to eliminate a lot of things actually, anything weak to bug, various things that are frail or chipped down. A priority option on Trapinch is huge, especially one that hits this hard off the back of a pretty respectable attack stat. So yes, Trapinch is feeling the benefit of its weird, uncharacteristically high attack stats. Up next we have Leafeon, and this is a stat of Leafeon's that I always forget about, because in my head I think of this guy as a sort of average, fast physical attacker. But Leafeon randomly has a really high physical defense stat of base 130. This is pretty incredible, and Leafeon actually has a higher defense stat than Necrozma Duskmane, Zygarde, Dialga, and even Zacian Crowned, which obviously looks completely illogical side by side, but even just looking at Leafeon in a vacuum, this doesn't look like a physically defensive Pokemon at all. Looks quite frail, in fact. It's made of leaves, it's a little cat. But hey, such a great physical defense stat is very useful competitively, and it gives Leafeon an edge over the competition in the tiers where it's viable. These are usually lower tiers, but Leafeon is pretty good down here. As a Swords Dance physical sweeper, its stats are solid compared to a lot of other low tier Pokemon. And that high defense allows it crucial opportunities to live hits and boost up with Swords Dance, which can win you the whole game in the right situation. Leafeon can also be used as a sunny day sweeper, as it has the ability Chlorophyll, granting double speed in the sun. And high defense means that you have more opportunities for that too, to spend a turn clicking Sunny Day, allowing you to tank even an incoming Ice-type physical hit or other threatening options. Leafeon is able to survive so much more thanks to this base defense. It usually doesn't specialize in being a physically defensive Pokemon or a utility Pokemon. Leafeon's strengths lie mostly in its offensive tools, and that's what it leans into, but the base defense comes in handy all the time in competitive for Leafeon. Up next we've got Drifblim, a very unique Pokemon in general. Drifblim was the first ever ghost flying type Pokemon in the series, a very good type combo. And it would be unique to Drifblim until the release of Oricorio Sensu. And you know what else is crazy about Drifblim? For some reason, Drifblim has an insane HP stat. Drifblim's base HP is 150. And looking at it, it raises some questions. This is a balloon that I could pop with a simple needle, and it has one of the highest defensive stats in the entire game. Drifblim's HP is equal to that of Giratina, which is insane. Drifblim is outdoing Eternatus in the HP stat, and Eternatus is famous for its high HP stat. And in fact, Drifblim is outdoing most box legendaries in their HP. You're tankier than Lunala, Palkia, Dialga, and many more. At least in HP alone you are. because the trade-off is that Drifblim's other defensive stats are extremely low. You've got an astronomically high HP, but only 44 defense and 54 special defense. Drifblim is kind of a strange Pokemon. In many generations it's used as a acrobatics sweeper with Unburden. Unburden is an ability that grants double speed if you have consumed or lost an item, and acrobatics also has double damage if you have not got an item equipped, so those are synergistic. I suppose Drifblim's bulk, thanks to its high HP, allows these sets the breathing room to survive a hit and consume whatever the item is to activate that Unburdened sweep. In Generation 9 though, Drifblim has a more defensive approach to its existence. And what's nice about having such a high base HP is that you don't have to invest any EVs into HP. So Drifblim can afford to go all in on its defense, patching up one of its weak areas with extra stats, and then investing in speed, so it's kind of a fast, physically defensive utility Pokemon. Drifblim has a pretty outstanding utility move pool. In Gen 9, Defog is very scarce, the utility move that gets rid of hazards. Drifblim has it, one of the few guys in the game that still does. Drifblim also happens to have Strength Sap, one of the best healing moves in Pokemon. Strength Sap is a move that lowers the enemy's attack by 1 and then heals your Pokemon for an amount equal to the target's attack stat. In many instances, this heals you all the way back up to full against enemies with high attack. And it also serves as a way to nerf them by lowering their attack. Drifblim also has access to Will-O-Wisp, one of the best status-inflicting moves in the game, just directly applying burn. So, thanks to that incredible HP stat, Drifblim can afford to run this set. One that invests in other areas on the EV side and takes great advantage of all these fantastic utility options. Up next is Vikavolt, who is famous for having an oddly low stat, that being its speed. Vikavolt is a bug electric Pokemon that looks like it would be pretty fast at a glance, but Vikavolt is very slow. It only has 43 base speed, which is terrible. Going back to Onix again, Onix looks like it should be slow. There's a big heavy rock thing. This guy has base 70 speed. How does that add up, folks? How does this add up at all? Vikavolt is also defined by its incredibly high special attack stat, and balance-wise, you can sort of see why they made it so slow, because 145 special attack is really good, and if this thing was also fast, it would be broken. But I don't know, the stat distribution kind of doesn't line up with the visual. But anyway, how does this guy do in practice? Vikavolt has some stuff going for it. It has the ability to levitate, which is very good, making it immune to ground. The high special attack means it's a pretty excellent wall breaker, and you also have access to Sticky Web, a very sought after entry hazard that lowers speed of enemies on switch-in. Unfortunately though, Vikavolt's low speed and poor defenses are kind of a death sentence. It is a pretty terrible Pokemon even in ZU, which is the lowest tier you can end up in as a competitive Pokemon. Bug Electric is terrible defensively, you are weak to so much. Vikavolt struggles to survive incoming hits to actually get use out of that special attack, and it barely outruns anything. So yeah, the weirdly low speed of Vikavolt has kind of been its nail in the coffin. It's the reason it is a terrible Pokemon. How unfortunate is that for Vikavolt Nation? And finally we have Duosion, a Pokemon often forgotten, the middle stage in the Reuniclus evolution line. And this Pokemon happens to have a crazy special attack stat of base 125. Most fully evolved Pokemon wish they had such a high special attack stat. This thing hits incredibly hard with special attacks. In fact, it is outdoing the damage output of such heavy hitters as Arceus. You have a higher special attack than Arceus. Ho-Oh also cannot quite match the damage output of Duosion. That looks insane side by side. And even Genesect cannot quite match Duosion in its power level. It's just the truth. Now, Duosion's a weird Pokemon. Middle stage Pokemon are the ones that often find themselves in competitive limbo with no place to exist. The babies at least have Little Cup. The fully evolved Pokemon find themselves in some sort of competitive tier. But often the middle stage Pokemon are forgotten. Duosion is an okay one. It has a viable role in Gen 6 ZU. What's rough about Duosion is that despite having such excellent special attack, all of its other stats are pretty terrible. With a measly 50 defense, 60 special defense, and only 65 HP, and its speed is pathetic at only 30. Duosion's value comes from the fact that it can hold an Eviolite, and it also has two excellent abilities, those being Magic Guard and Regenerator, two of the best abilities in the entire game here. Magic Guard grants a complete immunity to all indirect damage, so both of these can be great choices in Gen 6 ZU, and Duosion, with enough HP and special defense investment plus an Eviolite, can actually function okay defensively on top of that. Without any special attack investment, you are hitting pretty damn hard with Future Sight. This is a great option on Duosion because of its high power, and the fact that it hits 2 turns after being used makes things awkward for the enemy, forcing them into unfavorable situations or just being unavoidable and dealing significant damage. There is also a competitive tier that is unofficial called NFE, which stands for Not Fully Evolved, and it's just as the name suggests. You are only allowed to use Pokemon that are not fully evolved. Duosion happens to fit very well here, and it's a pretty viable choice in Gen 9 NFE. Duosion happens to have the highest special attack in the whole format, and can be used with a similar Eviolite, Magic Guard / Regenerator set, or you can go with a Sweeper Duosion set, running the combination of Acid Armor and Calm Mind to gain both defense and special defense, with Recover to heal yourself back up and Stored Power, which scales based on how many boosts you have. Duosion can snowball out of control and sweep teams this way, which is actually pretty damn powerful. This is one of the scariest Pokemon in Gen 9 NFE. So there you have it, folks, 10 Pokemon with stats that seem to defy logic, and how these stats have defined them as people. In some cases, these strange stats are a blessing. In some, they are a curse, but at least they make all of these Pokemon stand out. I, for one, think that logic is overrated, and I would like more Pokemon with really high stats for seemingly no reason. The fact that Purugly is faster than Latios is a bit comedic, wouldn't you agree? And we all need a bit more comedy in our lives. But what do you think? Are you a logic enjoyer or a comedy enjoyer? Let me know down below in the comments, and thank you for watching.